So let's get started here. Okay, we got it. All right. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and put your stuff in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, and then we can have you unmute because it's a small enough crowd here that we can do that as well. So again, just want to talk about we're going to talk about public service loan forgiveness. It has had a pretty bad rap because it's been really confusing. It was initially came out in 2007, but I think the official rules did not come out until like maybe 2 years later. It was like a year later when actually all the guidelines came out, and there was a lot of hoops. And I like to joke, like then they started becoming on fire, and you had to like jump through them while they were on fire. And so unfortunately, it has resulted in a lot of denial. So you might have heard the stat that maybe like 2% of the people who applied for public service loan forgiveness were actually accepted, and it was true. So what's happening now is with this current administration is they are taking the steps now to widen the accessibility and the ability to get forgiveness through this PSLF program. And so, what I like to use this analogy of is that for many of us, when we were told initially about this program, when we went to go open the door was locked. And so, and it was really frustrating, and it continued to be locked, throughout all these years. But with these changes here, and this is where the message needs to come out, is that a lot of us, tried the door, it was locked, and then we walked away from it, and we never wanted to talk about the door again. Okay, but the thing is that I'm here back selling you to try to open the door. Okay, and so because some people go, why are we even going to bother? There's still a lot of rules, there's still a lot of forms, and I'm not sure if this is worth the hassle. But the reality is with the changes that have happened and this limited waiver opportunity, your remaining loan balances can be forgiven for many people, and we have seen this. There's potentially money back for you because if you have overpaid on your direct loans, in theory, what we've been told is that the extra payments above the 120 will be reimbursed back to you for direct loan payments. And I just want to remind everyone is that this program is available because federal student loan debt is different than other loans and other types of debt. So some feedback that we've had from people who are working with others regarding getting this message out is that there's sometimes the sentiment of, well, I took out these loans and I should pay them back. And I totally get that. And we do financial counseling, we talk about debt repayment options, and we totally understand people wanting and need to pay back loans. But we like to remind people that for federal student loans, it's a different type of debt because it's actually a partial government entitlement program possible by taxes that you've already paid. And so the purpose of public service loan forgiveness and deferment and forbearance and all the flexible payment options, all of that is possible because of taxes that have already been put into the system as part of a federal benefit. And so sometimes it's too just reminding people that this is a federal loan program and there's benefits involved. And so with these extra steps that you can take, then you can take advantage of this program too. So what the exciting changes that have happened, which is why we're having all these workshops to get the word out, is that all of religious instruction now qualifies as employment for public service loan forgiveness. This went into effect last July, and we have seen the forms now being updated. And so unfortunately, everyone likes things in writing, and I totally get it, but there's not a whole lot of things in writing happening right now regarding this whole, including religious instruction, but all of the barriers to that have been removed. So it used to say like, religious instruction doesn't qualify, and the PSLF form and things like that. So, and we have been told and we have been reassured by people in Department of Ed and things like that, that it should be retroactive as well. So someone mentioned, they served as a pastor for 12 years, but they may not be currently rostered, and that's okay. This limited waiver opportunity includes every past payment you have made on your student loans. And so this is where any qualified payment, all prior payments, regardless of loan, type of loan, type of plan, if it was paid in full or on time, should count now towards public service loan forgiveness. And so that's why this opportunity ends October 31st. And so we want to make sure that everyone gets this news so that they can take the steps to get in before this opportunity ends. It's pretty much grandfathering everyone where you tried the door and it was locked. Now, all of those payments prior to that get grandfathered in. And when you open up the door, you should be able to walk through now. This also helps people in military service. And so a lot of times when people went on active duty, their loans automatically went into a military service deferment. And so instead of making a payment, then they weren't. And that technically didn't count either. So that put people at a disadvantage. And also, and something has happened too since this, see, so many changes have happened, I even forgot to update the slide. If you were encouraged in the past too to go on a deferment or a forbearance instead of an income-driven repayment amount, if you had 12 consecutive deferment payments or more than 3 years prior to, this is new information here, so I'll have to find this information in a little bit, but periods of deferment now also qualify towards public service loan forgiveness too. So it's not even all qualifying payments, it's qualifying time. Okay, so I keep on saying the word qualified and you're probably really annoyed with me with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and upload some documents here. While I'm doing that, Cherish, is there anything that I'm missing here so far?
Yeah, I think that just to get our heads around kind of the two things that have happened, because they happen sort of simultaneously and it gets a little confusing on the timing. So one is the pastors and rostered leaders, rostered ministers absolutely being eligible for public service loan forgiveness. That is a change that happened about last July. So that's the first thing that happened.
And that's permanent.
Yeah, that's permanent. So right, this October 31st date that we're talking about for the waiver period does not include that. That's going to continue. That's going to be the same. People in ministry are going to qualify for public service loan forgiveness ongoing. But the time sensitive thing is this waiver period. So like Kim said, very, very small percentage of total loans of anyone who should qualify have been qualifying for public service loan forgiveness. So the federal government saying, like, let's get all of these loans in that we can, all these payments, and try to get people through to forgiveness. But that's why it's the perfect time for you to be looking, because not only has it been opened to rostered leaders, rostered ministers who have education debt, federal education debt, but it's also the time to do it is now because of this waiver period, because payments that are getting kind of lumped in right now after October 31st, it will be harder or maybe even impossible to get some of those past back payments that don't qualify to count.
Yes, yeah. So essentially we're cleaning house here with the PSLF program, as this limited waiver is allowing all the prior things. So I uploaded an action plan handout, and the second page is fillable, so you can tap some notes. We're going to go through each of the piece of the puzzle real quick, just kind of go through the qualifications of all the different pieces that come through for PSLF, and then talk through some nuances that way. Okay. And then we can go through the PSLF paper form too. So when we talk about fill out the form, I will show you what the form is and what it takes to fill it out and help you avoid pitfalls in that area too. Okay, so the first piece of the puzzle is, so first of all, how do you qualify for public service loan forgiveness? Is there's three major hoops. One, you have to have qualifying loans, which are currently direct loans, or you have to turn them into qualifying loans. You have to have qualifying payments or eventually get onto the income-driven repayment plan. And you have to normally, in normal times, work for a qualifying employer, which is all government agencies of every level, from local all the way to federal, any 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and then other nonprofit organizations who may not have nonprofit status, but provide public services. So for example, public health places or libraries and that type of thing. But for most people in doing religious activities, the church itself is a nonprofit, or they work for a denomination that has the 501c3 nonprofit status. So that's where you all would be under at this point. As rostered leaders. So, and then the position must be considered full-time, and we'll go into more detail that way. So under usual terms, you have to have all three qualifying things to qualify for PSLF. But with this limited waiver time period, you do not need to be currently employed if you already have the 120 payments. So, okay, so let's go through the first puzzle piece, which is what are qualifying loans? And so this is the overall map of the different types of student loans that are out there. And this is why this can be really confusing, is over here is we have private student loans and other alternative loans like home equity loans and that type of thing. This conversation will not include these types of loans. This will only be federal loans, okay? And so the good news is that with this limited, so initially when the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program was initially announced, it only included direct loans. So everyone with FFEL or Perkins loans were automatically left out of the equation, which is really disappointing. But the good news is with this limited waiver, these are now included in the fold. And so if you have FFEL or Perkins loans, or you know someone who has them, these are the people that need to hear this message because they are at most risk of missing out during this limited waiver period. And so what we do is with this limited waiver is you take these loans, they will count all the payments to them in the past, and then you turn them into direct loans at this point. Okay, and so for those of us who have college age children, and you might get Parent Plus loans as well, they too qualify for public service loan forgiveness, but there's a little bit of extra step along with it. So that's why it's a different shade of blue. But the majority of borrowers, when they have just either direct federal loans for their undergraduate degree or direct Grad Plus, which is what you would use for seminary, those have always kind of counted towards PSLF. But now what we're trying to do is get these people over here to hear the good news about PSLF as well. So the first things is that you would just find out what type of loans do you have, and you want to verify that they're federal loans. And so to do that is you want to, if you haven't done so already, is to create an account at studentaid.gov. And so this is where personally one of our coworkers who worked for LSS Financial Counseling had been misled by her loan servicer. She was misinformed and was told that her loans turned into private student loans because she had FFEL and then consolidated to an FFEL consolidation loan back in the 2009 or so. So she was told it was a private loan, but then she heard if you log into studentaid.gov and if your loans show up in that list, you have a federal loan. So she did it, and guess what? Her consolidation loan showed up, and she realized that she had had a federal loan this whole time and a 15-year work history with LSS. And so she realized then that she qualified under the limited waiver and was able to get her loans forgiven. And she did get the letter that did say that her loans were zero. So yes, we have heard of people who have successfully used the limited waiver. Now, with that being said, we have not heard very many with this new religious instruction inclusion, and that's because the timing of the announcement and the change to the PSLF, and unfortunately the current loan servicer Fed Loans, who's doing public service loan forgiveness, is getting out of the business. And so the combination of all three has led to a large backlog of forms. And so they keep on saying they're processing them on a rolling basis. And so we just ask people to be patient because we have a lot of people in the pipeline and we're hoping that that will come through.
But we have heard of rostered ministers that have had their education debt forgiven. So
yes,
not
and we have seen people's payment
yes.
count, even if they didn't qualify for 120. I've seen rostered ministers with their payment count significantly increase too. So we have seen the forms be processed, and it does work, and you do get qualifying. So this is what you will see when you log in, and there's a lot of different help tools available. And so you'll need to drill down into your loans. You want to hit view details, and then you hit view each loan, and then you can kind of see if it says direct, or if it doesn't say direct but they're still on the list, then they probably are FFEL loans. And so you just want to, that's how you would be able to tell the difference. Okay, so those are the different types of loans that you have. So the first thing is, what type of loans do I have? The second thing is qualifying employment. And so you have to be considered full-time. And so, but the good news is if someone goes, my calls are really full-time. But if you had multiple calls, if you were like, let's say you had 2 calls that equaled a full-time, or if you worked half-time at a call, and then your other half you worked at a nonprofit or another qualifying employer, that still counts. Multiple part-time jobs totaling at least 30 hours a week will qualify you for this for PSLF. And also, even if your calls may not have been full-time, but if your previous employer, I mean, we all know that part-time ministry jobs usually translate to some kind of full-time commitment one way or the other too. And so this is where if your previous employers are willing to sign your PSLF form and verify that you are a full-time employee, or we've seen other ministers in different denominations get the vouch from the denomination saying they were a full-time rostered, person under their denomination, somehow to imply that it was full-time work. It doesn't matter how much you get paid. I mean, you could get paid $100 a month stipend, but if you were considered a full-time employee, then that would still qualify you. It's about what your status is as the employee. And it has to be a W-2. So unfortunately, it cannot be 1099 employment. It has to be a W-2 work. But, and it doesn't matter what you do for your qualified employer. It matters where you work and what your full-time status is, or how many hours. And so what we've seen pastors do is that they go back through all their previous employers, even if they've had 2 or 3 per year, to get up to the 30 hours. Every previous employer then signs that form to get submitted then for PSLF. Are there any questions on that?
And I think just being careful too, we keep saying full-time employment, but whatever that 30 hours a week plus, I mean, as long as the congregation will certify that you worked 30 hours, which the federal government is saying is employed full-time at that point then.
Right. And it's whoever is in charge of your paycheck. The Department of Ed doesn't really care. It could be your church president, it could be an administrator, it could be the office person, professional, whoever handles that, you're the accountant, that's who would sign your PSLF form. And so some people go ahead and they go online, they use the PSLF help tool, which if you are tech savvy, that can be helpful. But I just want to give you a caution in that if you put in your employer in this help tool, many churches and places of religious instruction are not in the system because you may be the first one coming through. And so then it shows up as like a yellow caution triangle that says like your employer may not qualify, and that has scared people too. Again, they try the door, it's a little jammy, then they get scared and they run away from the door. And so this is where if you know that you're, if sometimes the help tool can be helpful to help you pre-fill out the form. Otherwise, it might be easier just to do the PDF form attachment instead. Okay. And so so just be aware, if you use the help tool, don't be alarmed by that caution.
There are
And
2 questions, Kim, going back to
Yes.
the qualifying employer about churches that have closed or just it's really hard to get this information. And I think if a congregation has closed since you were employed by them, I would go to the synod. We are
Yes.
seeing synods working those type of
And
issues
Matt.
out as well. Or if you can't find anyone to contact at the congregation before, no one's willing to sign, again, work with the synod. Synods are absolutely, the synod staff understand the importance of this, and I think are really willing to work with individuals.
Yep. And so and that we've seen that with other denominations too, is that the synods or the local areas are working together to make sure that pastors get the proper things signed. Yeah. And worst case scenario, if for some reason that's not going to work, let's say you work for a nonprofit or even a nonprofit employer agency that's not longer closed, is that there's always a fun thing called IRS forms, taxes, and so you can provide information from your previous tax returns in that way. And so there's always a way to find as long as there's a paper trail somewhere through taxes, they'll be able to find that. You might have to have the burden of responsibility or contacting the IRS to get the information. But again, what the message here, you'll hear me say over and over again, is that we're not going to take no for an answer. Okay, is we're gonna try multiple different ways, even if you get told now to, is that or something happens with the paperwork, is we're gonna resubmit it, and we're gonna keep on trying over and over again, because that's unfortunately bureaucracy with PSLF, is that's kind of the name of the game, is repetition. So
Kim, there's a question, sorry, just going back to employment, about severance, like a period of severance.
it
So
all depends on what they consider your employment period to be. So that would be outside of your decision. It would be whatever the church puts down as far as your employment period.
it might depend
So
on if they were paying insurance during that time or
I
other
don't
benefits that
know.
I think you could argue that if you were asking someone to fill out the form, well, you still covered my portico benefits or whatever.
So my thing is just always do what, if you know that you have more than 120 months of payments, and then this is like maybe 2 or 3 months of it, like, so let's say you're at 140 payments, and you don't really need to worry about it, then that's where it's like, how much do I need to worry about this? But if you're right on the border of 120, that's where you might need to push more for that. So I guess that you have to weigh and gauge as far as how much time and effort you want to put into your timeframes for employment. But it would be every month that you've made a payment, under previous qualifying employment, that's what it would count for. So, and we'll go into more detail here with what regarding the payment pause as well. And I will get to that, Sarah, that question. Okay. So what we're going to get to is just let's talk about qualifying payment. Oops, I'm trying to move my chat box. I can't. Okay. So let's talk about the different types of payment plans. And so in regular times, without the limited waiver, these are normally not qualified payments under public service loan forgiveness. But under the limited waiver, all of these counted. So if you were under graduate repayment, so let's say you're on a fixed payment for 25 years, time-based payment plans are payments that, as long as you pay for a certain amount of years, your loans were actually paid off in full. And so for many people, they consolidated all their loans, they put on a 25-year payment period, and then they just went to town on that. But now, to qualify for PSLF, then going forward, is that you would need to switch your payment, if it was a time-based payment, then to an income-driven one. And income-driven repayments are different because your payments are based on overall household income, not loan balance. And so this is where the payments you make may not cover the interest of the loan. And so we just want to remind everyone that under IDR, your balances may go up over time, which can be unsettling to some because they don't like to see their loans getting larger. But the purpose of IDR then is to have a quote unquote affordable payment based on your income. And then after 20 to 25 years, then the rest of the balance then gets forgiven. Or under PSLF, then it's 120 payments, which is 10 years, and they do not need to be consecutive, by the way. So you could work for a qualified employer for 5 years, go, work at the private sector for 2, come back to nonprofit work or 501c3 work, and then resume, and you haven't lost anything. The payment count just continues to resume. And so this is where under IDR, for some people, when let's say they lost a job or their income significantly went down, and back in previous times, they may have been pushed into a deferment or a forbearance, like an unemployment deferment. And so where there was no payments, but the reality is the loan servicers did a disservice to them because their IDR payment may have been 0. And that still would have counted towards PSLF or your overall time-based loan this loan forgiveness for 20-25 years. And so this current administration is fixing that too. And so if you have been in long periods of deferment, but still worked for a qualified employer, again, the other piece of the puzzle, those 3 years of deferment will also count for you as well towards your PSLF count. So that is coming down the pipeline. We're not we haven't really been told much about it yet. And so if you fill out the form and it doesn't quite count it right now, again, that's where we're saying just hold on to your forms, and you might need to resubmit them down the line. But there are different types of income driven payment plans depending on what types of loans you have and what years you took them out. And so just the most popular one right now is the repay. That's the most affordable income driven repayment plan. But this is where going forward too, if you decide, let's say you have 8 years of counts, and let's say you just start out. So for people who have just entered to the ministry, they have to determine, is it worth doing an IDR for 10 years? Even my balances may get larger over time, but then I will qualify then for the remaining loan to be forgiven. That's the conversation people might be having then, as far as whether or not they want to pursue this or not. And that then, depending on their income, for some people it works and for some people it doesn't. So right now, this is where we're at. So I know this is a confusing chart here, but so this is where it was previously, these two things previously for public service loan forgiveness. This is all the check boxes you had to do to get your payments to count, okay? The good news is right now, during the COVID forbearance, the payment pause is that these months that you haven't been making payments, as long as you still work for a qualified employer, it should count towards your PSLF count. So even if you don't have the full 120, and let's say you just went into repayment, 3 years ago, it's still worth it for you to fill out the PSLF form to claim the past 2 years of the payment pause too. That's an extra 24 months that can be added to your PSLF when payments resume going, and plus more whenever payments resume, which right now is slotted to be at the end of August, and we'll see what happens. But through this limited, so that's where you didn't have to be in a qualifying repayment plan for these payments to count. If you were in a previous deferment, that shouldn't count. The only thing that may not count, which I haven't gotten official word on yet, is if you were in school deferment. And that all depends on how your loan servicer has coded those payments. If they coded them as COVID payment pause payments, then they will count. But if they code them as in-school deferment, then they may not count, unfortunately. But you can still complain to the Department of Ed because it's still unfair to everybody. It's still unfair to you. So we've been told, just let them know all the different people that have been left behind with these rules, because this is what all the complaints about ministry leaders being left out of PSLF, that's what prompted the change to happen initially. So sometimes complaining does count. Does help. So under the limited waiver here, you have to fill out the form before October 31st, but you did not need to be in a current repayment plan to do it. And you currently do not need to work for a qualified employer. So if, let's say, you had 12 years of being a pastor and you had FFEL loans, and we had someone, they were retired, but it now counts. They can apply for PSLF during this waiver time because they turn it into a direct loan, and then immediately the balance can get forgiven because they have the 120 payments in here. So this is why it's an exciting time, is that some of these requirements, some of the hoops have been removed, which allow more counts. And then even if you don't have the full 120 payments, this limited waiver, let's say, adds 5 extra years. That 5 years of extra payments then will count for you permanently going forward too. So I had someone reach out to me saying they filled out the limited waiver and they were 6 years away from PSLF, and now they are only 1 year away from public service loan forgiveness because they had 5 years count from previous times when they were having when they had FFEL loans. So consolidate is a tricky word, and with Department of Ed, they use that word interchangeably. So you can consolidate to a new loan, but basically what we're using this is you have to turn your old FFEL loans into direct loans. And this is another loophole, is if you have old FFEL loans, let's say that are 12 years old, and you have, let's say, newer direct loans because you went back to school and you had different loans, you can combine the old FFEL with the new direct into a new direct consolidation loan, and that entire loan balance then will count with your oldest month count. So if you have new and old loans, you can merge them together and have them count then with the oldest loan count during this limited time.
I would say
If you,
before you do that though, please contact us and have us walk through that with
true,
you.
again, sorry, I
was
just get
no,
excited
I
about it
think
because
that
it's so exciting.
that
That's
is
where the
super
game changing is happening too, is that, so yeah, contact us because it's not a straight line, it's a little loop to loop a little bit, but these are the kind of scenarios that we're talking about that that people can take advantage of during this time. And the last piece of the puzzle is, some might say is the most important, is time. So you just need a full 120 payments, and that may feel slow. And so sometimes the time passes quicker than others. And so that's the last final piece of the puzzle. So let's go through so we talked about the help tool, but if you're not a help tool or computer-based person, then I uploaded the PDF, and so you have, and I have it here in front of me, is you print off this PSLF paper form. And so then what you want to do is you are responsible for filling out section 1, which is basically your information here. And you only check that box if your loan servicer does not have your updated information. But I would not change your information here on this form. I would change your loan information. I would change your personal information first with your loan servicer and then fill out the PSLF form, because you just don't want, you're imagining thousands of paper forms heading to one loan servicer. So, and they have a quota that they have to fill, at their desk. And so what they're doing is, to meet their quota, is they're finding all the wrong, quote unquote, wrong things and dumping them. Okay, so you want to try to prevent as many mistakes as possible so that your form slides through. So I would just go ahead and put all your current information here with what you have with your loan servicer. And then section 2 is you want to decide what you'd like to do. So for those of you who know you don't have 120 payments, but you just want to get your account started, just click the first box. It's, I just want to find out how many qualifying payments I have made, or if my employer is a qualified employer. They lumped both statements in one line. Just fill out the first box. Okay. If you know that you have way more than 120 payments and you want to go ahead for full PSLF loan forgiveness now, then you click 2 and 3, because then what happens then is you feel like you have the 120 payments, and then if you qualify for forgiveness, then your loans go into administrative forbearance. So then if payments resume during this time while it's being processed, then you don't have to make those payments. Okay. And then so here, let's see here. So then section 3 and 4 is your employer. Okay, so then you sign it. And so just want to confirm that this needs to be what they consider a wet signature. So it can be either a scanned signature, that a real signature of yours that you put into the PDF, or you have to sign it with a pen and then rescan it. That way, that's fine. But it cannot be a computer generated signature. So you can't use Adobe Fill and Sign. You can't use DocuSign. You can't use any of those computer generated ones. If you use the one where your finger is, gives your print, apparently that counts, but it can't be like a computer font signature. And you want to tell your employer that too, because we've had employers sign it, with the computer font, and that gets rejected as well. So with your employers, especially with churches, because there's never maybe an HR department, they want to make sure that this is filled out. And we have been encouraging people to let the employer fill out the begin and end date, because what we've been finding is sometimes employees will guess this range, and then they give it to their employer, and then the HR person will scratch out the beginning date or the end date and refill it. You don't want any crossing out or refilling or whiteout on that, because that looks like you've meddled with the form and it may get rejected. And so just let the employer fill it out, or remind them to fill it out. Sometimes they've been leaving that blank too, like you leave it blank for your employer and then they leave it blank too, and then all of a sudden you have no range. And so then this is where for churches, let's say, or 501c3s, is your employer government? They hit no. Okay. Is your employer tax exempt? For the majority of us here, it would be yes. Okay. Then tell them, do not fill out any of these other things, because I've seen also employers continue to answer 11, 12, and 13. Well, what do they hit? They hit no. and all of a sudden they no longer qualify, boop, it gets rejected. So if you trust your employer, let them fill this out. If you don't trust them, you may want to assist them in filling this out and then just tell them to sign it. And however you do it, that's between you and him and God, I guess. So, or you and them and God. And then you can work out the details. So that's where they will sign it there. And then the last two things are just, you don't have to print out the last 2 pages. It's just instructions. But this essentially is the PSLF form to get your months counted. And so right now it's telling you to submit it. You can upload it to myfedloan.org. You can fax it and you can mail it. Unfortunately, FedLoan is where you're supposed to be sending this. MOHELA has been not officially announced, but we all know it, that they'll be taking over the PSLF program. But we aren't allowed to send them to MOHELA directly yet. And so what we've been telling people is document and keep proof that you've submitted everything before the PSLF waiver expires. So if you mail it, send it certified mail with return receipt. Keep a copy of the form for your records. If you upload it, take a screenshot that you uploaded it to MyFedLoans, that type of thing. And then you got to wait. Takes 2 or 3 months at this point. From 4 to 6 weeks is what we've been told, but it might be longer than that.
And we are hearing people saying, oh, I'm just going to wait till, because FedLoans is a mess. So I've history with them where I, don't hear from them. So I'm just going to wait till the next servicer has been named. And we are really saying, get in the system. You need to get this information in as soon as possible. It's going to get transferred over. And if you keep the information, you still have it in case you need to resubmit it to MOHELA, but hopefully you won't have to.
Yeah. And at least on your end, then you have all the documentation that you've submitted it, and so if there's any pushback on that as far as, oh, you didn't make the limited waiver deadline, and who knows, they may extend the limited waiver too, but that's all hearsay at this point, and we just don't know what's going to happen. So what we've been telling, that's why we just say, like, let's just use the roads that have already been created for us and move forward on them for now, because we can't predict what opportunities may arise in the future. So we just kind of move forward with what's been given. There's a lot of scams out there, so I'm not going to read everything on the slide, but just be aware that there's a lot of people out there that are promising quicker help, or they'll charge you fees to fill out the form. But as you can see, all of this information and the ability to apply for PSLF is what you can do for free and through our services as well. And so you do not need to pay anyone to do something that you can do on your own. So I gave you an action plan thing. So, hopefully you can use the handout to help create your action plan regarding your loans or employment, or, making a list of all your previous employers, just looking at previous payment history to see what repayment is, and then just make sure you do time. Do we need to fill out a form for each employer? Yes. So this PSLF form is for every single employer that you've had for the previous 120 payments. So that's where a lot of people, yes, it may end up being a lot of forms, and I understand that, but it'll be totally worth it. So that's kind of our spiel is, and then once you kind of get onto the PSLF road, then there might be some additional steps you might have to take, either switching to an IDR, income driven repayment plan, or consolidating your loans to direct, that type of thing. But that's where we can help you go through those steps. And answer your questions that way. So our services are, are for student loan repayment, but it's also for just overall financial wellness. Some people come to us just to get a second view on their spending and savings goals and making sure they're on the right track, or they might want to look at debt repayment options and that type of thing. And that's what we're here for. So, and this is the information, the phone number you can use to call us. So. All right, so is there so I tried to talk as fast as possible. I did answer some questions in the meantime, so hopefully that's been helpful, but are there any questions?
I think we've hit everything that was in the chat.
I have one.
Sure.
So you had mentioned pulling our W-2s from our churches and having them signed by the powers that be, council president, whatnot. Do we also upload those with the PSLF paperwork?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. That's if your employer has been, it's out of business. And so if your church or previous employer is still around and they're willing to sign the PSLF form, then you do not need to find your W-2s. That was just for if your church or a previous employer no longer existed. That's where you would submit your old W-2s and that type of thing to prove employment with, because they had the federal ID number. But yeah, for employers, all they need to do is sign the PSLF form.
Okay.
But thank you for that clarification.
Yeah. And then one more follow-up.
Mhm.
I was kind of going back and figuring out how many payments I've made, and it's over 200.
Woo! Yeah.
Woo. So would it be worthwhile for me to go back to the very beginning of my repayment, or should I just go back to the 120 and call it good?
Well, it's any payments past, let's see, what's the date?
Prior
that
to
they-
07
prior
is
to
when it
oh,
started.
Prior to
So
07.
I wouldn't
Yeah,
go prior
so,
to
yeah.
2000. We can
every
look
single month post October 2007
Okay.
counts towards PSLF. So if you have direct loans already and you've been making these payments and you have an overpayment of potentially 6 years, then conceivably past 120 payments, you will get those extra payments refunded back to you. That's
Okay.
what they've been saying, which is really exciting. And as some people have seen checks, like I've seen like on the internet, but you always wonder, you're like, is that really true? Or are you just 15? I'm not sure, So, but yeah, so that's definitely, so for you, if you know that if you have direct loans and you have way more than 120 payments, yeah, you count them all. You count them all and you use the payment pause, you use everything. Okay.
and then call us, Ivy, and tell us, because we want to know. Like,
yes,
we're so
and then
excited
send us
for
the letter.
people.
Yes, it's
please.
very exciting.
Or have an appointment with us too, even if you want to do some of it. I mean, we can, just because the clearinghouse of information we have too, we're learning mostly from individuals that we're seeing and what people are experiencing, because this is uncharted territory and we're really learning from just working with rostered leaders, to be honest. So.
And what I saw personally at a different assembly that I was at is a pastor had the same employer for the past 12 years or something, but his loans shifted from one loan servicer to another and then came back to the other loan servicer. And the Fed loans did not count the time, even though same qualified employer, same qualified payment, that period of time where it went to a different loan servicer, didn't count. And so they didn't bother to count it. So we're going to have them resubmit the form to get, but he should get the 120 payments too. So more than that, actually. So we're hopeful for him too. Any other questions?
Jackie, you looked as though you were going to ask a question. You unmuted. Is that, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Must not be. Okay.
In addition to questions, we would actually just be interested in feedback too, kind of what you're hearing, barriers that you still are hearing about, concerns. Those are all things that help us as we're talking to individuals and getting the word out, just to hear the landscape of what you're hearing about public service loan forgiveness and rostered leaders specifically.
So for me, one of the two things that were most confusing before this conversation was trying to figure out what loans I had, because I know they had started out as direct and then they were moved around and bought by this company and that company, and so I had to re-bring them back to direct loans. So that was complicated. And then trying to figure out who do I have sign off on, yes, I've been doing this work. Do I need, what forms do I need? Do I need a W-2? Do I need the bishop to sign.
Yeah.
So to have those two pieces of information shared were huge. You know, I'm like, okay, I got my to-do list now.
All right. Awesome.
So that was really helpful.
Good. Yeah, the help tool sometimes can be helpful for people in traditional like nonprofit or government agencies where they can look up their employer and they're already in this system. But we actually, the feedback that we've gotten is the paper form is the way to go for church work, really, is you have the form, you have them sign it, you go on your merry way. But don't have them be checkbox happy, because that's sad.
Okay, other questions? Going once, going twice.
I'm just anxious to talk to a person about my situation because it's such a mess. So I hope I can reach somebody when I call this time.
Yes, I'm sorry that that happened to you. That's not what we want, nor
Yeah, sorry,
that's not
Sarah.
what we expect either on our end.
Sarah,
We
if
tell
you
people to
put
call
your
us.
if you put your number in the chat, I will have someone call you. Just chat just directly to me if you don't mind.
Sure.
And it will ring back from what would it be, 612 number? What did the area code ring back?
Yeah, we're 651 or 612 here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think, or 218. One of those numbers will be calling you back. So I know
I
it's
think
hard
it's-
to.
I think it's 2. I think when they
Yeah, I
forward
don't
calls
know.
to me, I
Well,
don't
actually,
know.
I'm going to have a counselor call you back. I will assign it to a specific
Oh,
counselor.
okay, yes.
So, yep.
That's a
So,
good
Sarah,
idea.
if you just
Okay.
chat me your number, I will take care of that.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Cherish and Kim, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate the time today. Thank you for the wider work that you're doing and supporting rostered ministers, not only in Minnesota and Region 3, but around the country. I was curious to learn that LSS Minnesota is the largest provider of financial counseling. I didn't realize that. Go Minnesota. I'm from Wisconsin and I live in Iowa, but I can still say go Minnesota.
Yes.
That's it's yet another instance of how LSS is like the best kept secret. They do amazing things in all kinds of different venues, and hardly anybody knows how awesome they are. So thank you both for your contribution to the larger work of LSS, but also for being with us today. All right. All that being said, go in peace, serve the Lord, try to have fun doing it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
all.
Have a great day.